Hello, and welcome to the X281 VS Code setup guide for Windows. VS Code is a free code editor for Windows, Mac, and Linux operating systems. VS Code is not a traditional integrated development environment, or IDE, because it has no integrated code compilation abilities. As a result, terminal commands play a larger role in VS Code's workflow. Using VS Code for X281 will help you familiarize yourself with Linux terminal commands and makefiles. You'll also find VS Code very useful in other EECS courses at Michigan. This guide is tailored specifically for X281 students interested in running VS Code on Windows Subsystem for Linux, or WSL. This guide will explain how to install WSL, how to install and configure VS Code for WSL, how to compile and run an X281 style program, and how to use VS Code's visual debugger. Let's get started. WSL is a feature in Windows 10 and beyond that allows you to use Linux command line tools and applications alongside Windows without the hassle of virtual machine or dual boot setup. WSL typically requires fewer resources than a virtual machine and still allows you to access your Windows file system from within WSL. However, WSL does not natively support graphical programs and only provides limited support for programs that attempt to access hardware. For more information about WSL, please see the resources page at the end of the document. For this guide, we will use WSL2, which we'll refer to as just WSL. WSL2 is a newer version of WSL designed with better file system performance in mind. WSL2 uses a lightweight virtual machine to run Linux. This virtual machine operates entirely behind the scenes and requires no configuration by the user. WSL2 is faster than WSL except when accessing the Windows file system from within WSL or when accessing the WSL file system from within Windows. WSL2 is also only compatible with certain builds and versions of Windows 10 Plus, so make sure your computer is up to date before beginning. If you download updates, make sure to apply them and restart before beginning. To install WSL, open PowerShell's administrator and run the following command. So I'm going to do that by hitting the Windows key to bring up the search menu, then type in PowerShell, then when it says Windows PowerShell, I'm going to click Run as Administrator. Hit yes. Then I'm going to bring it over to the side and type WSL -- install. It's going to download WSL and some other configuration things. I'm just going to let it run. Now that WSL installation is finished, let's continue. A note here, if the command gives you an error about WSL not being recognized, follow Microsoft's manual installation instructions. Pay careful attention and read all the content of each step, as some steps can be easy to miss. When you get to selecting a distribution, make sure to choose Ubuntu. After you're done installing WSL, make sure to restart your computer. The setup process will not work if you do not restart your computer after installing WSL. So I'm going to go ahead and restart right now. Alright, I just restarted. Now setting up Ubuntu. Ubuntu can be launched by searching for Ubuntu in the search bar at the bottom of the screen and clicking the application that appears in the results. Okay, so Ubuntu and then open. When first launched, it's going to go through a one-time setup process, and we detail that below. So one thing is that if you receive an error about virtualization not being enabled, you'll have to change a setting in your computer's BIOS. To do this, look up something like how to enable virtualization in name of computer BIOS. For example, if you had an MSI Katana 15 laptop, you would type how to enable virtualization in MSI Katana 15 BIOS. Once you do this, try to launch Ubuntu again. If you get the same error, make a post on the class discussion board and we'll help you out. Make sure you include which computer you have. So since we didn't get an error, we're going to follow this. It's going to prompt us for a username. I'm just going to use my name, my first name, which is Ethan. And then choose a password. Okay. Okay, password, installation successful, and it'll drop us into the shell. And I'm going to keep it open to follow the how to use Ubuntu section. After it's completed the one-time installation, we can launch it with the same method as above or by running the following command, bash. So for example, if you had regular PowerShell open like this, you type bash, it's going to open the Ubuntu shell. Otherwise, when we launch Ubuntu, we're going to start at this directory, so /home/user. It's located within the WSL file system. If we choose to uninstall WSL, all files within the WSL file system, including all files of this directory, will be deleted. If you want to access this file system from within Ubuntu, you can change directories. If you wish to access your Windows file system from within Ubuntu, you can change directories by running the following command. So my username on this is my first name with a capital E. That's for my Windows directory, so like this. And then I can return to the WSL file system by doing cd and a tilde. That'll bring me back to the home directory. For an introduction to the Linux command line, please see the resources page at the end of this document. And to run sudo commands, which we'll see in a little bit, you'll need to enter your password when prompted. At this point, you should have successfully installed WSL on your computer. The next step is to install VSCode. First, we're going to download VSCode by clicking this link, and then on the page, clicking the big blue download button under the Windows logo. That's going to go ahead and download. So I'm going to run the executable once it's done. Okay, make sure you read it, then hit accept. I'm going to not launch just to show how to open VS Code. So what you're going to want to do is go to the search bar, type in VS Code, and it'll pop up. Hit enter. To get to this page in the screenshot, I'm going to click welcome, and then we'll have the recent files, the tabs in the Explorer interface, and the icons on the sidebar. VS Code is extremely customizable, and if you don't like a feature, you can probably find a way to disable it by searching on Google. Now let's go through an introduction to VS Code. You can navigate VS Code using the sidebar on the left. This icon is the File Explorer interface, and it'll display a tree-like view of your workspace directory. All instances of VS Code will begin with the File Explorer interface selected by default. Your workspace directory is the directory from which you launched VS Code. The search menu allows to search each file within your workspace directory for a particular string. There are string options to use regular expressions, match whole words, match case, and find and replace. This search is very fast. Source control allows you to perform version control without using the command line. For each project in this class, you should have at least a local Git repository on your computer. Ideally, each project should also have a private repository on GitHub. If there's an existing Git repository within your workspace, VS Code will automatically track changes for you. From the debugging menu, you can run a visual debugger complete with step over, step into, and live variable viewing functionality. We'll cover the visual debugger in greater depth later. The Remote Explorer interface will display a tree-like view of the file system on a remote machine. On Windows, the Remote Explorer interface will display the WSL file system. This interface is not particularly important for this class, and you'll notice that we don't even have it. Lastly, the Extensions menu brings you to the Extensions Marketplace where you can search for and download user-created packages to add additional features to VS Code. Before we start, we're going to need to download the WSL extension. The WSL extension allows us to use VS Code and WSL just as we would from Windows. If VS Code detects that you have WSL enabled and installed on your computer, it may prompt you to automatically install the extension. You may choose to install this extension from the prompt if you'd like. If you don't receive this prompt or wish to install the extension manually, you'll need to search the extension marketplace instead. If you're following this guide and reinstalled VS Code after having uninstalled it, you may find that searching the extension marketplace results in an error stating that you cannot connect to the marketplace at this time. To resolve this error, you may need to uninstall VS Code and navigate to the following folder within your Windows file system. Delete the code folder within roaming and reinstall VS Code. VS Code retains some files between multiple installations if not handled properly. Failure to clean up these files between installations may cause problems, such as being unable to access the extension marketplace. Since we already have the extension marketplace open, I'm going to go ahead and use the search bar and type in WSL. Find the extension, here it's at the top, and click install. Great, now we have it installed. Now we're going to open VS Code in WSL. We should configure VS Code before we begin programming. We're about to reopen it. This time, however, we'll reopen VS Code inside our WSL file system. There are two ways to complete this task. We can either do it in the Ubuntu terminal by typing code space dot. However, since we already have VS Code open, I'm going to go with option 2. We're going to take a look at the blue box in the bottom left corner of the window. It doesn't say WSL, so we're going to go ahead and click it, which opens a drop-down menu. Then we're going to click Connect to WSL. and this will launch VS Code within the WSL file system as shown here. First, it's got to run through the setup step, but once it's done, it'll show. Okay, now the blue box also indicates that we're in WSL and our Linux distribution. To access a particular directory in VS Code, you click the blue Open Folder button. You're gonna have to click Welcome again. Open folder, and then we can navigate here. For now, it's sufficient to open our home folder. You may see some hidden files there with like the dot and the dot, but that's not important right now. Now we have extensions to install. So we need to have the Ubuntu terminal. I'm going to pull up the one we had before, then I'm going to run these commands. I'm just going to use the copy paste feature here, type in my password. This is going to install some prerequisites that we need for the rest of the tutorial. Now that we're done with installing prerequisites, go ahead and follow the Linux-based VS Code configuration guide video